I never imagined the end of my life would sound like a splash. One second I was on the deck of the sleek white yacht my son had proudly called our family boat, and the next I was tumbling backward into the Delaware River. The shock of the water was like 1,000 icy needles stabbing my skin. My breath snapped shut in my chest. For a moment there was no up or down, just darkness, bubbles, and the copper taste of panic in my mouth. Above me, muffled voices carried through the water. I heard Sabrina's high, sharp laugh, the kind she used at charity galas when she wanted people to think she was charming. Then Michael's voice, my only son, low and flat. Let it go. That was the moment I knew they hadn't made a mistake. This wasn't an accident. This was a decision. I kicked upward, lungs burning. The surface broke open and I gulped air, coughing and choking, my hair plastered across my face. "Michael," I screamed. "Please." My voice cracked. The yacht was already sliding away, its polished hull glinting in the afternoon sun. No one leaned over the rail. No life ring. No sign of hesitation. Just the slow churn of the engines, carrying my family farther and farther from me. I tried to swim toward the shore, but the current was strong, tugging me sideways like a giant hand. My designer loafers filled with water, dragging at my feet. Somewhere in the chaos, an image of Thomas, my late husband, flickered in my mind. His hand on my back at board meetings, the way he used to whisper, "We built this together, Helen." For a heartbeat, his voice was stronger than the river's pull, and I kicked harder. "Stay awake," I told myself. "Stay angry." Cold shock wanted to lull me into surrender, but fury, white, bright and searing, rose in my chest. After everything I'd given Michael, every door I'd opened, every secret I'd kept for him, this was how he repaid me? By trying to erase me from the balance sheet of his life? I don't remember the exact moment I saw the two men in the fishing boat. One of them shouted, a deep voice cutting across the wind, "Hold on! We're coming!" A flash of red jacket, an oar splashing. Their boat veered toward me. My strength finally faltered, and I let my head fall back, staring at the sky, clouds racing like gray horses overhead. For the first time since Thomas died, I prayed out loud. Not for money, not for revenge, just for another chance. The boat reached me. Rough hands grabbed under my arms, hauling me aboard like a drenched net. I collapsed on the wooden floorboards, coughing river water until my ribs ached. One of the men pressed a blanket around my shoulders. "Ma'am, are you okay? Should we call the cops?" he asked. "No," I rasped. My voice sounded like gravel. "Please, don't tell anyone you found me." Even as I shook with cold, a strange clarity settled over me. If my son wanted me gone, he would think he'd succeeded. And that, at least for now, was exactly what I needed him to believe. The little fishing boat smelled of diesel and river mud. As Frank, the taller one with sun-cracked hands, steered toward a hidden inlet, I huddled under the blanket and tried to stop shaking. Tyler, barely older than my grandson would have been if Michael had given me one, offered me a thermos. "It's just coffee," he said gently. I took a sip. The bitter heat burned my throat but steadied my mind. "Name?" Frank asked. I hesitated. "Helen." Nothing more. Not my last name, not the empire attached to it. For the first time in decades, I felt safer being nobody. They tied up at a weathered dock beside an old bait shack. "You can warm up inside," Tyler said. "Phone's on the counter if you need to call someone." I looked at the dusty receiver, imagining the news alert Michael would see if I dialed 911. "Elderly billionaire survives boating accident." No, he had to believe I was gone. I shook my head. "Thank you, but I can't. Not yet." Frank and Tyler exchanged a glance but didn't press. That small mercy, two strangers respecting my silence, felt like a lifeline. My own blood had tried to drown me, yet two men who didn't know me from a tourist handed me coffee and a towel. The contrast seared itself into my heart. I spent the next night in a tiny back room above the bait shack, staring at a water-stained ceiling while my body ached. My mind replayed the last 20 years like a bad documentary. Thomas and I had met in a college cafeteria, he with an engineering textbook, me with a notepad full of marketing slogans. We built our logistics company from a single truck and a rented warehouse. By the time Thomas died of a heart attack, we had contracts on 3 continents and a net worth Forbes couldn't stop writing about. But the bigger the fortune grew, the smaller my family felt. Michael, once the boy who brought me dandelions from the yard, had become a man who sent his secretary to schedule brunches with me. Sabrina floated into his life on a cloud of designer perfume and practiced smiles. I tried to welcome her. I told myself it was loneliness making me suspicious. It's funny, in a cruel way. The more successful you are, the more people assume you can survive anything. Widowed at 63, still running board meetings, still looking polished at galas. No one noticed that my hip hurt, or that my mornings began with pills lined up like soldiers. I thought if I kept writing checks for Michael, his startups, his hobbies, he'd remember the boy who used to hug me after nightmares. I thought money bought loyalty. What it bought was an alibi. The yacht invitation had sounded like reconciliation. Mom, we've been distant. Let's spend the day together. Just us. Even the way he said just us had made me ache. I dressed in the navy blazer Thomas always liked. I brought a bottle of vintage wine. I left my phone on silent to be present. How naive that feels now, like walking barefoot into a trap you set for yourself. I turned onto my side on the thin mattress, pulling the blanket tight. Somewhere outside, the Delaware lapped softly against pilings. In the dark, I whispered, "They think I'm dead." The words felt heavy, like a stone I could either carry or throw. My pulse steadied. If I was dead to them, then I was free to watch, to plan, to make them show who they really were. The next morning, Frank knocked gently. "We're heading out early. You'll be alone here. Are you sure you don't want us to call someone?" I met his eyes. "No, but thank you for everything." He nodded, accepting that. As their truck rumbled away, I wrapped my scarf tighter and looked at the road leading toward my estate. For years I had been the matriarch with the open checkbook. Now I was a ghost with nothing but my wits. It was time to see how my family would behave at my funeral. 4 days later, I stood under an ancient oak at Greenwood Cemetery, hidden behind its twisted trunk like a child eavesdropping on grown-ups. A borrowed black veil covered my face. The autumn wind lifted the hem of my coat, carrying the smell of cut grass and roses from the rows of wreaths below. In the center of it all sat a gleaming silver casket that could have paid for a small house. Empty, of course. A showpiece for the living, not a resting place for the dead. Rows of chairs held mourners, old friends from my church circle, former employees, a few local reporters craning for a quote. Their grief was real. That, more than anything, made my throat tighten. At the head of the crowd stood Michael and Sabrina, dressed in flawless black like a magazine spread on how to grieve with style. Michael's eyes glistened as he accepted condolences. Sabrina dabbed her cheeks with a silk handkerchief, tilting her face just enough for the cameras. To anyone watching, they were the picture of loss. To me, they were actors in a play they'd written on my corpse. The pastor's voice droned on about life and legacy. I barely heard him. My eyes kept searching for the people who truly knew my affairs. My longtime attorney? Nowhere. My accountant? Absent. My financial advisor? Not a sign. The people who managed my billions had skipped my funeral. Unless they knew something, or were part of something, they should have been front row. A gust of wind lifted the veil. I pulled it tighter, biting the inside of my cheek until I tasted iron. Rage kept me warm as the temperature dropped. They had already built the narrative. I was a confused old woman whose decline had ended tragically in a drowning accident. Reporters whispered to each other about worrisome signs Michael had supposedly noticed in me. Sabrina had been sobbing to the press about how afraid she'd been that I might wander off and never return. Lies stacked on lies, rehearsed until even strangers believed them. When the service ended, Michael placed a white rose on the casket. Cameras clicked like insects. Sabrina looped her arm through his and leaned her head on his shoulder, a perfect tableau of grief. I gripped the bark of the oak, nails digging in. Let them bury an empty box. Let them sell my image as senile and lost. Because while they mourned a ghost, I was alive, watching, and sharpening my claws. That night, with the echoes of my own funeral still rattling inside me, I made a decision. I couldn't keep drifting like a victim. I needed proof, solid proof of what they'd done and what they were planning. That meant going back to the one place I'd sworn never to enter again. My old house. Frank didn't like it, but he drove me anyway. "You sure about this?" he asked, as the Princeton streetlights flickered past. "You walk in there, you could be walking straight into a trap." "I built that house," I said quietly. "If anyone knows the ways in and out, it's me." The Marshall home rose at the end of the street like a monument to everything Thomas and I had built together. 35 years of laughter, arguments, Christmas mornings, and late-night talks. Now it belonged to Michael and Sabrina, signed over after Thomas's death because I'd believed family meant something. As we pulled to the curb, a single porch light burned. Otherwise, the house was dark. I took a breath, feeling the old brass key in my pocket. Michael had never asked for it back. Why would he? As far as he knew, I was at the bottom of the Delaware. The tumblers clicked, sending a shiver down my spine. Inside, the air smelled wrong. Expensive cologne, harsh cleaning products, something artificial masking what it really was. No longer my home. I moved slowly through the rooms with the small flashlight Frank had given me. White sheets draped the furniture. Underneath them, new leather couches, an oversized entertainment system, bowls of imported fruit, wine bottles with labels I didn't recognize. Not a house someone visited. A house someone lived in. Upstairs, in Thomas's old study, papers spilled across the desk. At the top sat a folder stamped in bold black letters, Project Helen. I touched the edge of the file with shaking fingers. Medical reports, pages and pages describing cognitive decline, hallucinations, memory lapses I'd never had. Some documents bore forged signatures. Others were authenticated by doctors I didn't know. Notes described staged incidents, forgetting an appointment, mixing up medications, wandering at a dinner party. I remembered those moments. Sabrina whispering the wrong date, Michael switching pill bottles. Every mistake had been engineered. They weren't just stealing my fortune. They were rewriting me. I snapped photos with a disposable camera Frank had given me, hands trembling. That's when I heard it. A sound soft, fragile, unmistakable. A baby crying. I froze. Every nerve in my body went taut. Michael and Sabrina had no children. They'd always insisted they were too busy, too ambitious. So whose baby was in my house? And why were they hiding it? The cry came again, thin but real, threading through the hallways like a ghost. I crept up the staircase, each step groaning like a warning. My heart hammered in my chest. For a second, I wondered if exhaustion and grief had finally broken my mind. But no, the sound was there, insistent, rising and falling in waves. The guest room door, the one Sabrina had always hated because it smelled old, stood slightly ajar. I nudged it open with trembling fingers. The smell hit me first. Powder, warm milk, a sweetness that had never belonged in this house before. My breath caught. The wallpaper had been stripped and replaced with pastel clouds. A white crib stood against the far wall, draped with a canopy, like something from a glossy magazine. Shelves lined with stuffed animals and brand new toys gleamed under a soft lamp. And there, swaddled in an expensive blanket, lay the source of the cries. A baby no older than a few weeks, his face red and scrunched with need. Michael and Sabrina had never told me they were expecting. Days earlier on the yacht, Sabrina's waist had been slim, her movements sharp and quick, not the body of a woman recovering from childbirth. My knees nearly buckled. Whose child was this? And what did it have to do with Project Helen? I took a cautious step closer. The baby blinked up at me, hiccuping into silence. A strange ache pulsed in my chest. Betrayal and grief had turned my heart to stone. But this child was innocent, a question wrapped in a blanket. Headlights swept across the window. A car door slammed outside. Voices floated up the hallway. Michael and Sabrina were home. My blood turned to ice. Clutching the disposable camera to my chest, I slipped back into the hall, padding down the stairs as quietly as my throbbing hip allowed. By the time the front door opened, I had slipped out the back into the garden, breathless and shaking. I didn't stop running until I reached the corner where Frank Less's pickup waited with its engine idling. I tumbled inside. "There's a baby," I gasped. In the house, a newborn. Frank's brows shot up. "What?" "They're hiding a child. I don't know whose, but it isn't theirs." The engine rumbled as he pulled us away from the curb, his jaw tight. "That's not just greed anymore, Helen," he said grimly. "That's something darker." He was right, and I needed answers. By dawn, Frank had called a woman he trusted, a private investigator named Laura Kane, sharp-eyed, mid-40s, a voice like gravel and patience like steel. She listened as I told her everything, her pen scratching across a legal pad. When I mentioned the baby, her expression hardened. "I know a place that matches this pattern," she said. "Private clinic across the state line, discreet, expensive, surrogacy arrangements." Within days, Laura confirmed my fears. The baby in my old house had been born only 3 weeks earlier. The surrogate mother, a 17-year-old runaway named Anna Rivera from Pennsylvania, had died suddenly during delivery. "No family, no inquiries," Laura said, sliding a thin file toward me across Frank's kitchen table. "Healthy girl, no complications. Records say cardiac arrest. Too convenient." I stared at the photo of Anna. Dark hair pulled back, a shy smile frozen in time, a child herself. My hands shook as I traced the edges of the photograph. Michael and Sabrina hadn't just stolen my fortune. They had stolen a life. "Someone arranged this," I whispered. "Michael and Sabrina don't have the brains for something this elaborate." Laura nodded. "Exactly. Surrogacy clinics don't just let minors walk in. There's a handler, a fixer, someone with power who makes it all legal on paper." The next week she dug deeper, combing through property records, legal filings, names tied to the so-called clinic. One name appeared again and again, like a watermark. Claudia Mercer, an estate attorney in Newark. Polished, respected, terrifyingly efficient. On the surface, she helped wealthy families navigate inheritance planning. Beneath that mask, Laura found something darker. Dozens of elderly clients who had died under mysterious but conveniently timed circumstances. "She's running a network," Laura said, spreading surveillance photos across Frank's kitchen table. "Your son and daughter-in-law are just pawns. Mercer recruits greedy relatives, manufactures evidence of mental decline, and clears the path for inheritance. I've tracked at least 20 suspicious deaths tied to her clients in the past 5 years." The pictures chilled me. Claudia stepping out of luxury cars, shaking hands with men in suits, slipping into hospitals and private clinics. Always there, but never directly tied to the deaths. "So she's the mastermind," I said, my voice low, and Michael delivered me into her hands. Laura tapped one photo, a grainy shot of Claudia leaving the same clinic where Anna had died. Mercer was there that night. Witnesses say she oversaw the birth personally. The baby was delivered. Anna never left alive. I pressed a hand to my mouth. The betrayal of my son had already cut deep. But this was monstrous. They thought I was dead. Mercer was moving fast, pushing probate through the courts. Within weeks, my estate would belong to Michael, Sabrina, and that baby. She'll kill again if she has to, won't she? I asked. Laura's eyes didn't flinch. She already has. And if she learns you survived, she won't stop until you're gone for good. The weight of it settled over me like a shroud. My son was no longer just greedy. He was entangled in a machine that devoured the vulnerable, laundering murder into inheritance. For the first time since being shoved into the river, I felt real fear. Not just for myself, but for that baby upstairs in my old house, alive but living on borrowed time. I couldn't keep running. If Claudia Mercer was the spider at the center of this web, I had to step into the web myself and force her into the open. The plan was simple, terrifying, and utterly insane. I would return to the Princeton house, pretending to be the vulnerable ghost Mercer thought she had finished off. Hidden recorders placed by Laura would capture every word. Frank would be stationed nearby with federal agents quietly alerted by Laura. It was the only way to expose the entire operation, the lawyer, my son and daughter-in-law, and the chain of corruption they had become part of. Dusk fell as I slipped through the back door. The house smelled the same as before. Artificial, expensive, alien. I settled into Thomas's old armchair in the living room, the very spot where he had once read the newspaper every morning. Heart hammering, breath shallow, I waited. The door opened at exactly 7. Michael froze in the doorway, keys dropping to the floor. His face drained of color. "Hello, darling," I said evenly, voice steady despite the tremor in my bones. "Did you miss me?" Sabrina's scream cut the air, raw and shrill, like metal scraping stone. Michael just stood there trembling, staring at what he thought was a ghost. And then, like clockwork, Claudia Mercer entered. Perfectly tailored suit, cold assessing eyes, leather portfolio in hand. "Well," she said, voice sharp as glass. "The woman who refuses to die. Mrs. Marshall, this is unwise, very unwise." I leaned back in the chair, folding my hands. "Is it? Or is it unwise for you to sit here and admit what you've been doing?" Her thin smile never reached her eyes. "You think you've cornered me, but I provide protection, influence, power. You can't stop me." The windows shattered as agents poured through every entrance. Chaos erupted. Boots clattered against hardwood floors, shouts of command, the metallic snap of handcuffs. It all blurred together in a storm of justice I had been waiting for since the day Sabrina pushed me into the river. Claudia Mercer tried to flee. Expensive heels skidding across the floor. She made it 6 feet before 3 agents slammed her to the ground. Her eyes flicked toward me, desperate, pleading, but the web she had spun was over. Michael whispered, his voice cracking. "Mom, I didn't mean for it to go this far." I looked at him, measuring the betrayal, the greed, the blind following of Mercer's orders. "You did," I said, "and now you'll face the consequences." The legal storm that followed lasted months. Mercer was convicted on all counts and sentenced to life without parole. Her network unraveled like rotten rope. Doctors, lawyers, even a probate judge fell with her. Michael and Sabrina took plea deals, 25 and 20 years respectively, stripped of the wealth they had tried to steal. 5 years later, Samuel, the child from the nursery, was a boy full of laughter and questions. He knew the truth. He knew the brave young girl who had wanted him to live. He knew the people who tried to raise him were thieves blinded by greed. And he knew that love, real love, is a choice, not a bloodline. Sometimes, as I tuck him into bed at night, I remember the river, the cold hands of betrayal dragging me under. But then I look at him, safe, smiling, alive, and I feel the warmth of survival, of justice, and of second chances. We rebuilt together, a family forged not by inheritance or deception, but by courage and care. And as I watch Samuel sleep, I whisper a promise into the dark. No one will ever take him from me, not by greed, not by lies, not by betrayal. Because some ghosts may haunt, but some ghosts fight. And some, like me, rise again, stronger than ever.